Hey everybody, welcome back to the Facebook group and the YouTube channel. I've got a very good friend of mine who I haven't spoken to in a while, so I'm kind of excited about this one, Shawn Lefebvre. We actually used to volunteer at a local television station in the Toronto area, and even then he was trying to get into the music business. He had a band, and you wound up going to school in London, didn't you?
I did, yeah, yeah. Right after working at Rogers, volunteering at Rogers, I ended up going to Fanshawe for
Mhm.
the Music Industry Arts program, which I completed.
And you got a lot of experience through that, I'm thinking, through your years there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I was there for the 2 years. I did the 2 year program. There was the option to do the 3 year program, but I ended up doing the 2 year program. And during that time, I got to work closely and get to know, guys like Kevin Doyle,
Mhm.
who was the mixer for Alana Miles,
Okay.
Black Velvet, and Terry McManus, who was had toured as a musician and was a manager. I think he played with not Fred Penner, but um, the guy with the tickle trunk,
Oh, Mr. Dress Up.
Mr. Dress Up. That's right.
Yeah.
And So yeah, there's Kevin, and of course there's Jack Richardson, who had produced the Guess Who. So yeah, I made all those connections there, and through that, made more connections through them as well because I kept in touch with them after school as well. So it was a good start, anyway, for sure, a good start for me to kind of launch off of.
So were like the teachers and instructors there, were they all like kind of like music industry vets?
Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, Terry had been there for I think 30 years at the time.
Right.
He recently passed, but he brought that whole knowledge of his touring,
Hmm.
songwriting. He had a record deal for a while, and so he brought that management skill over. And then there's, like I said, Kevin Doyle was a teacher there for a while,
Hmm.
and Jack ended his career there as well. And Jack's son is Garth Richardson, Go Go Garth.
Yeah.
So I got to meet Garth through Jack.
Right.
Um, but yeah, yeah, all these old school vets who had done a lot in the Canadian music industry ended up teaching at Fanshawe, and that's where I met them, and that's where I cut my teeth quite a lot back then.
A big difference in the technology, I guess, back then compared to now.
Yeah, I'd say I mean, at the time I was at school, we were using digital. We had the Pro Tool stations,
Right.
but the first year was mostly analog. So we actually learned how to cut tape, which is
Hmm.
something that is probably foreign to a lot of people working in the
For
business
sure.
now.
Yeah.
And working with the 2 inch tape and going direct to tape and using actual compressors and
Yeah.
actual outboard gear that you would have to twist knobs on and
Yeah.
EQ and stuff. And so there's no preset plugins on a desk,
Right.
But then, like I said, in this during the second year, we kind of focused more on the digital side of things with Pro Tools and the plugins came in and a bit more in the box mixing and that sort of thing.
Right. Where did you head off after you were done school?
I immediately went to the Toronto area. I was in Mississauga for a while.
Hmm.
Actually living in one of the bedrooms of the producer from the TV station that you and I volunteered at.
Oh, okay.
I needed a place to stay. He had a room, and so I was living there. And yeah, no, I stayed in Toronto, and I started making phone calls and email. I emailed everybody. I called everybody,
Right.
every single studio in the city. And it took me a little while to land my first gig. And there was a lot of no's. There was a lot of, oh, our studio's shutting down. There was
Yeah.
a time where at the end of, I guess, the end of 2003, 2004 ish, even 2005, a lot of studios are just closing down, like huge studios that were just closing.
Right.
And so, you get the rejection letter, the rejection email back saying,
Yeah.
I wish we could, but we're literally closing our doors this weekend and everything's going, we're selling everything. So it was kind of a bummer there, but it took me a little while to get a gig, but I was in touch with Harry Hess, who owned Vespa Music Group at the time,
Okay.
and he's the singer, songwriter, producer for Harum Scarum,
Okay.
who were, they had the record deal in Canada in the 90s, and had various record deals throughout Europe and Italy over the years. And they're still action, like they're still in action today. That they're still recording and writing. So Harry called me back because Kevin Doyle, that I'd met at Fanshawe,
Hmm.
had done the first 2 or 3 Harum Scarum records. And so because of that mutual, that connection, I guess, Harry gave me a shot. And that was my first gig. My first gig was walking through Vespa Music Group in North York. And that's where I started. Yeah, started doing a bunch of sessions there. And memory's a bit foggy, but I was there for quite a while.
Now you played music, I know that much. You played guitar and you were played in bands. Did you focus on you did studio work, obviously. Did you ever do anything with like live music as well?
Yeah, for sure. As a young kid, I really wanted to be a rock star. I think like a lot of people want to be a rock star. So I started playing guitar, and throughout high school and college, I was in bands. And when I was in the MIA program at Fanshawe, I did a bunch of session work, so many sessions. I played bass and guitar for all my peers, everybody who needed a guitar player or a bass
Right.
player. I'd set up and do that. And then, um, you know, as much for me as it was for them, in the sense that I really wanted to learn being on both sides of the glass, and by that I
Right.
mean, when you're on a session, when you're recording, especially when you're in a recording studio with an engineering room, and you got the live floor.
Right.
There's a really big difference between being on the floor and being in the control room where the desk is. So I wanted to do as much as I could of both.
Right.
And so I was doing a lot of sessions then. And even at Vespa, I was doing sessions for friends of mine.
Mhm.
So songwriter friends, we would collaborate together. We'd write songs together, and I'd bring it into Vespa, and I would record it, but I would also play, guitar and bass as much as I could
Mhm.
on those sessions. And then later on, after I worked with a band called LA Guns out of Los Angeles,
Mhm.
with Steve Thompson. Actually, he produced the record, and he mixed Appetite for Destruction
Oh
and
boy. Yeah.
Injustice for All for Metallica. And of course, I'm a huge Metallica fan, so I was like, where's the bass? What happened?
Yeah.
And so he was very quick to blame Lars. But so after the LA Guns record that I did with Steve and those guys out in Peterborough, actually, I went on the road with LA Guns for quite a while as their live sound guy.
Oh wow.
And I got to tour a little bit and see that kind of action on that side of things. But even before that, when I was in Toronto, um, I was working out of a couple venues. I did sound at Reverb a couple times
Mhm.
on Queen Street, and another place called Rock Boutique, which was just up on Bathurst near Queen, um, which was a bit of a smaller club, smaller bar. But there was a lot of great acts that came through there, so I did a lot of live sound there. So I tried to do as much as I could, as often as I could, just to keep busy and to stay relevant. Also, I need to um, to make all the connections and to meet all the bands, and there's no better way for me at the time than to be at the venues that they were playing at.
And now you're in Quebec, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And did you do a
Uh,
lot of work in Montreal or in the Quebec? Because
no,
there is a whole different industry in Quebec from what I
there's
remember.
yes, it's very, very different here. I'm in Montreal. The I didn't all the sessions that I actually worked on since being here have all been out of Toronto. So
Okay.
I'd go back to Toronto and do the sessions there, or there were some times where I would do some editing here.
Right.
But no, since being here, no, the sessions for me have kind of dried up, and I haven't been very active as far as studio work here is concerned. But you're right. There's a completely different world here. And I think specifically live settings.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever seen a concert here in Montreal, but
No.
the crowds, I can tell you, the crowds here are some of the loudest and rowdiest crowds I've ever seen. Um, we my wife and I love music, obviously, and we've traveled back and forth to Toronto to see shows for bands that didn't come to Montreal or whatever.
Right.
And she's from here, and she would tell me all the time, like, these crowds are just they're not as exciting as at home in Montreal. And it's true, like the kind of the energy of the crowd is a
Yeah.
lot less in Toronto, even though it's typically a bigger venue. But the enthusiasm from the crowd is not the same. And I wonder if maybe that has to do with the fact that you have to when you get a beer, you have to go off to the side and you're kind of cordoned off,
Yeah.
in Ontario. Whereas here in Quebec, you can, we in the summertime they close down half the city, and you can walk the streets with a beer. So uh, maybe that has a bit to do with it.
It might. That's for sure too. I mean, I can even say that here now that I've been living in the Maritimes for three
Yeah,
years. Live concerts and music is totally different here than it ever was in Ontario too. Like just not just the music, but just the audiences as well. So I can hear what you're saying. I imagine it would be that different in Quebec as well. So now you were saying you worked with some artists from the 90s.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. From the '90s. Well, there's Hammerscarum, like I said.
Yeah.
um, Harry and Pete and Creighton Doan, who was a drummer at the time.
Hmm.
Sorry, I'm choking.
That's okay.
And of the '90s, I guess there's also I did a session with Jay Semko of the Northern Pikes.
Right.
I was working with a very, very incredibly talented person named Hill Kukudis. She at the time was in a band called Drowning Girl
Hmm.
as a singer, songwriter, guitar player, and producer as well. And she'd call me and said, her band, we're doing a session for this Northern Pikes compilation,
Hmm.
and that she wanted me to engineer it. And so I went down to the studio, and Jay Semko walked through the doors, and I'm like, my God, like that's actually the guy from Northern Pikes. I was, freaking out a little bit. Because I remember, really liking them, um, growing up, and my dad was a big fan of theirs as well. So I was really freaking out, and was excited that Jay was there, and we got to record a song called Teenage Land
Hmm.
that the Pikes did, and it was released on a compilation. But Hill recently, I think last year, won a Juno for Engineer of the Year. So she's doing great things. And other '90s artists, there was I worked with Mike Turner quite a lot, who
Hmm.
was the guitar player for Our Lady Peace
Hmm.
during their heyday. And later on, I think he did join a group called Crash Karma, which had Jeff from the Tea Party, Jeff Burrows, the drummer for the Tea Party, and Edwin from My Mother Earth.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Uh, so they had a super group, and so Mike and I did a bunch of sessions together at his studio called The Pocket, which is on the east end of Toronto.
Hmm.
Um, Aside from that, I did a session with Amanda Marshall,
Wow.
which was really, really fun. She was such a sweet person, like really, really great. That was a Vespa, and I was the assistant engineer to Dennis Tuga, who was the engineer, the head engineer on that session,
Mhm.
who's also an incredible person and just a great guy and an incredible talent. But Amanda came in, and you know, she's got a great voice,
Yeah.
but she nailed it. Like it was like we were doing like demo stuff that they were pitching for the next record,
Right.
and it was one take stuff. It was really there's no need for auto tune. There's no need for Melodyne. There's no need
Yeah.
for any of that stuff. She would just like she'd set up, do her thing, and it was quick one takes. It was incredible to see. Um, and aside from that, I guess there was also there's a band called Dragonette,
Mhm.
which do you remember Mike Bullard?
I do. I
Okay,
do.
so in in that kind of late '90s, Martina Sorbara was on Mike Bullard's show, and I remember watching and
Right.
thinking, wow, she's like just phenomenal, just a great voice, great singer, great songwriter, and she played guitar also.
Yeah.
And then I got the phone call to do Dragonette sessions with Eric Ratz, and I was like, well, cool. I've never heard of them. And I walk in, and it's Dan Kurtz from the New Deal and Martina, who had been a solo artist up until that point. And
Right.
so we were doing demos that they were doing for Maverick at the time. Um, so kind of a fun thing from the two bands from
Right.
the kind of mid to late '90s into the 2000s with this new band Dragonette. Um, and I think that was kind of it, more or less, as far as Canadian bands are concerned, or '90s Canadian bands.
But you can talk about other bands you worked with too, even if they weren't Canadian. I'm sure it's. I know a lot of bands used to come up and work in Canada that weren't necessarily Canadian. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, I'm
I've been on a tour of Metalworks, and they had the creme de la creme of people coming up to use that studio before.
yeah, yeah. Metalworks was fun too. I did a couple sessions there for local bands. Um, oh man. Speaking of, yeah, there's I assisted on the second Billy Talent record,
Oh, really? Okay.
and I feel I'm a jerk for forgetting that one. Um, but yeah, no, that was a fun gig. That was they had done most of it at the warehouse in Vancouver, which is Brian Adams' studio,
Okay.
and they did some guitar overdubs. If I remember correctly, there was guitar overdubs, some rhythm stuff. Um, Most of the guitar solos were done at Vespa, and all the vocals were done at EMI in Toronto.
Okay.
So I was kind of on the back end of that. So I got the credit as an assistant on that one. Um,
And
and
they were a Mississauga band, weren't they?
they were Streetsville, yeah,
Yeah. So you guys had
yeah.
something in common there, Mississauga
Well,
boys.
and it's the funny thing is that I was before going to school, I was very involved and very tight friends with these guys in a band called The Livid from Streetsville,
Mhm.
and they ended up getting A&R guys from Atlantic at the time to check them out, and we're talking early 2000s.
Right.
So the guys from LA, the guys from Atlantic came down to check them out and essentially wanted to sign them.
Right.
And for some reason or another, the deal didn't go through. And while those guys were in town, someone had suggested that they go check out, I think maybe the Rivoli or the Horseshoe or something. This band called
Right.
Billy Talent were playing, and the story goes that these guys kind of walked out of one session with the guys from the Livid, walked into the Horseshoe or Rivoli or whatever, and saw Billy Talent, and the rest is history. They signed them shortly after.
Right.
So it was kind of a funny thing. I remember talking to Johnny G, the bass player for Billy Talent, and kind of going through that whole scenario, that talking about two bands from Streetsville essentially getting the attention from the same guys from the same label, that the A&Rs at Atlantic, and then one band getting the deal, because the other band essentially didn't shit the bed, but the deal kind of went through. It didn't go through the way that they wanted, but of course, good on Billy Talent, because they've done phenomenally well, and are just great guys,
Yeah,
and it's just super consistent with amazing music over and over and over again.
sure.
And so after the Billy Talent record, a couple years later, I was doing some sessions at the Pocket with Mike, and Ian from Billy Talent actually came in to do some stuff for Much Loud at the time. So he was doing a bunch of guitar spots for
Right.
Much Loud, like those bumpers between music videos
Sure.
that they had at the time. So we got to work together again a few years later as well. Um, but then again, aside from that, bands that were kind of big in the '90s, but not necessarily Canadian. LA Guns.
Hmm.
I got the phone call for that, which is kind of a funny thing. Um, I was at I was at CMW one year, and with a group of friends, maybe like a band that I was maybe working with, or I can't remember who I was with, but I just remember specifically someone mistook me for someone else.
Okay.
As I was leaving the hotel, and someone mistook me for someone else, and I was like, no, I'm not that person, but that's cool. And then we started talking, and they're like, hey, if you're involved in music, why don't you come hang out with us? We're hanging out with Steve Thompson. And, it was one of those moments where I dropped everything. I was like, yeah, for sure. I want to hang out with Steve Thompson. Like you know, um, so I got to meet Steve, that night, and hang out with some other people there. Um, and, you know, from that mistaken, that person who mistook me for someone else, I stayed in contact with them. And, as the months went by, I got a phone call saying, hey, Steve is coming to Toronto, or Peterborough, to do a record with LA Guns, and the engineer dropped out.
Right.
So, do you think this is something you'd want to do? And at the time, I wasn't super familiar with LA Guns. I knew that there was a guy in Guns N' Roses prior to Slash who was a guitar player,
Right.
and kind of pieced it together that LA Guns, Tracy Guns is the guitar player for LA Guns, and
Yeah.
he's the Guns from Guns N' Roses originally. And so yeah, I kind of dropped everything, and did the session. I went out to Peterborough at this compound, this chalet, you know, compound that this super rich guy had. He had started a record label with essentially no experience in record labels, but the dude had a ton of cash, and he built this incredible studio at this chalet, like I said, and the garage was like this. He had transformed this, like what would have been probably like a 30 car garage into a studio. Um, and here we are, holed up in this place in the middle of nowhere, far from any civilization, really.
Yeah.
And these guys in LA Guns were just cranking out this record. And at the time, they had like VH1, or like basically a film crew following them,
Right.
because um, all those kind of reality series were really big at the time, like the Osbournes and
Right.
Family Jewels, the Kiss thing. Those were all really big, and I think they kind of wanted to follow that pattern of let's document the whole record and
Yeah.
release it as a TV show. So, you know, here I am with these super seasoned rock stars from the mid to late 80s and into the 90s. And we did this record with, like I said, Steve, super mega producer and mixer. And that was a crazy experience. And the thing that kind of bums me out about all that is that we did the record. The record was really good, in my opinion, of course.
Yeah.
You know, not just because we were involved in it, but it was a good record. The songs were strong. We ended
Right.
up, cranking out something really good. But it never got to see the light of day. It was, kind of that story that happens a lot. You put a lot of effort into something and it gets shelved for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think they couldn't find essentially a distributor. And there were some mounting kind of issues within the band, and the singer that they had at the time, Marty Casey, who was from Rockstar In Excess. I think he came in like
Okay.
second or third place. He was the singer in LA Guns. Later on, he ended up leaving, so he left the band before the band could find a distribution deal
Hmm.
to get the record out. So it never saw the light of day. But from that experience, doing the record with them, I got to be really good friends with them, and they invited me out on tour with them as a sound guy. Um, and then through them on that tour, I got to do sound also for another band from the late 80s called Faster Pussycat, also from
Okay.
LA.
Yeah.
And, kind of that, sleazy, kind of loose rock,
Sunset Strip kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. And so I ended up doing sound for both of the bands, LA Guns and Faster Pussycat. They were sharing the bill,
You're right.
and the concert bill, I mean. And through talking with Tammy, the singer for Faster Pussycat, he had mentioned that he wanted to do a live record. So I was like, well, since we're here and I've got the experience, like, why don't we just throw this together, man? Let's start recording these sets, these shows that you guys are doing, and while I'm doing sound for you guys, I can set up a Pro Tools rig and just start recording off the board. And then after tour, I'll put it all together and we'll release a live record. And so that's exactly what we did. We got a Pro Tools rig. I hooked it up every night. So we did sound check, and then I hooked up the Pro Tools rig, and we ended up recording most every night. Um, and then after that, I came home. I stayed in LA for a little while after the tour was over, and I started editing the record there. And then I finished it in Toronto when I came back.
Hmm.
And that ended up being the only live record that Faster Pussycat has ever done,
Really.
which was, I think they called it like the front row at the Donkey Show or something silly like that. But it was, it, you know, what started off as essentially being the engineer on a studio record turned out with me as the engineer on a live record while on tour with, like I said, these guys who were just like another level seasoned. They had
Yeah.
seen it all, they had done it all, and here I was at 24, maybe 24 years old, like just I I kind of got thrown into this thing that I didn't understand,
Yeah.
but I was hanging on. I hung in for the ride, and it was crazy experience. But all that to say, yeah. So I didn't. The LA Guns record wasn't released, but the Faster Pussycat record was. So there's that.
So do you still keep in touch with some of your music friends?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, even though I don't do as much or anything at all. I still keep those guys in contact. We still talk. We're still friends above all else.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess I got really lucky that at the time that I was working, I was surrounded by super good people, and
Yeah,
that's not to say that it's that's not everyone's experience, and I
yeah,
understand that, and I really feel really lucky that I had that experience of working with genuinely good people. Um, like the Harry Hesses of the world, that they're
right.
like, guy's a sweetheart, and so I keep in touch with those guys because, like I said, it was a great working relationship, but above all else, we were buds, we were friends, we made some really good personal connections, and so yeah, I still keep in touch with those guys.
Now being in Quebec now, years ago, I had the chance to actually see the studio
Oh
in
yeah,
Warren
in
Heights.
Morin Heights,
Did
yeah,
you
yeah,
ever get up there and see where that was? I probably wouldn't have been open because I actually think it burned down from what I heard, but you must
well,
have heard of the studio.
yeah, 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 for sure. That's that's the studio. I mean, they called it the studio, right? The
Right.
studio. Um, no, I was when I was coming up, I guess I was it was done by the time I got here.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to do any sessions there. But I've met and probably worked with a bunch of people who did.
Right.
But from what I understand, it's essentially an abandoned building now. Um,
It was
and
when
I
I
know,
saw it, but it was
right.
cool just to stand by that window and look in where moving pictures was recorded. And
Yeah. When you think like, Neil Peart was probably set up like right there,
yeah,
you know,
um,
and guys like the police records were done there, and
April
Brian Adams
Wine.
stuff, April Wine, yeah,
I mean, anyone who was a Canadian musician probably recorded there in their heyday.
yeah, and then some. Like you said, I mean, police, and I think Peter Gabriel even did some stuff there, and
Hmm.
a lot of bands, not only from Canada but from other parts of the world, um, because it was close enough to Montreal that if you wanted to get into trouble, you could, make the
Yeah,
drive or get someone to drive you. Um, and then, go back to work the next day or a couple days later once you've shaken off the hangover.
yeah,
Um, but I think, yeah, it would have been fun, I think, for sure to work in a place like that, especially like you said, because of if those walls could talk or sing,
right.
it's probably some great stories in that building that we'll never hear of. But yeah, I know I didn't get the opportunity to work at the studio ever.
Well, it's one of those places that if you didn't know the area, you'd never find it.
You'd never find it. Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
what's that studio? I think the guys from the Treasure Hip own it or did
Oh, Bath,
out at
Ontario,
Bath. Yeah,
near
that's right.
Kingston. They still do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, a studio like that, you wouldn't know it's there unless you don't know it unless you know.
Yeah. So no, it's true. I mean, even the guys from Rush said it was a great place to record because they could bring their families there and there was a place to stay, and it was
Yeah.
more of an atmosphere. You know what I mean? You're in a beautiful setting, and it was really easy to focus on what you wanted to do there, which I think is important when you're working on something like that.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, like when I think of the LA Guns record, it was, I say Peterborough, but it was literally like a 20 or 30 minute outside. Sorry, a 20-minute drive outside
Right.
of Peterborough in like the thick of the woods, man. Like
Right.
it, it was hard to get there. Um, and but it allowed the band and allowed to, us, the creative, the production team, to
Right.
really focus on what we were doing. And I think of when you record in if you record in the heart of Toronto or North York or whatever it is, like you're so close to the action that you
Right.
may get distracted. But when you're removed from it, like in like this record in Peterborough or La Studio, for example, when you're away from it, you get to focus and really
Yeah.
work out what you're there to work on, as opposed to get distracted and potentially
Yeah.
miss a couple days.
Well, it sounds like the short career you did have in it, you really did fulfill a lot of things you really wanted to do and got to have some really cool stuff happen. So
Yeah, I got, like I said, I feel really fortunate that I got to do what I did. And I got to meet a lot of really good people.
mhm.
And I got to be a part of some really fun records that, are still being listened to today. I got really lucky. And so I may not work in it now, but I definitely cherish those memories of being there and doing a lot in a very short period of time, at a time where, I was in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, and um, less responsibility back then,
Yeah,
and so it was okay for me to work 16 hours a day and
yeah,
sleep on a studio couch because
yeah,
I'm going to be back here tomorrow anyway, so may as well just crash on the couch and
yeah.
grab a coffee and then start up the session again. So yeah, and I don't think my back could handle sleeping on a couch now, but
No, yeah. That's how you know you're getting to. I've always said these two jokes. You know, you're getting old when your favorite bands are playing casinos,
oh man,
and
yeah,
when you start going to bed at times you used to go out.
yeah, yeah, I will agree with that one for
Yeah,
sure. There's very often, it's 9:30 and I'm dozing off. It's what time is it now? It's
yeah.
probably almost my bedtime. Uh,
Yeah, it's kind of sad, but it's good in a way. It's responsibility, I suppose.
yeah, we'll call it that.
Thanks for coming and doing this, Sean. It's really great to hook up with you again and talk.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
And I hope you're enjoying the group. And anytime you want to contribute something, please do.
Oh, for sure.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sean. Talk
That's
soon.
awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.